There are leaders in the world who are made for impact.
In situations where I'm working with a leader that maybe the organization doesn't have a lot of development, it's like there are a lot of things that we can do to help develop ourselves. Podcasts like this, we've both talked about Audible and reading. There are industry associations, great ways to learn. So there's a lot of agency that we can take for ourselves to develop ourselves.
I'm Gretchen Schott, and this is Made for Impact, a show for leaders who want to leave a lasting impact on their organizations, their teams, and their lives.
My guest today is Deseri Garcia. She is a leadership development facilitator and an executive coach. And years ago, I actually heard Des speak at an event. And at that event, I was just stunned by the intensity and authenticity that she shared in emotional intelligence and mindfulness. And since then, I've had a number of friends work with her, either professionally as their coach, or they brought her in to facilitate teamwork and activities with them. And she's just brilliant. And I was so grateful that she said yes to being on the show. So today, she and I talk a little bit about how you can make an impact as a leader, how you can make an impact with your teams. And she shares a little bit about her high vibe retreats, which I think are so interesting. And I think you're going to love it. So go ahead, tune in. Let's take a listen. Des, I'm so grateful that you're here on the show. Thank you so much for saying yes and being a part of Made for Impact.
This was an easy yes, and I'm so grateful to be here with you.
Well, you and I have known each other for a couple years, kind of in the periphery, but tell my listeners who maybe don't know of your greatness, tell a little bit about you, what you do, kind of what you're about, share with our folks.
Okay. Well, when it comes to greatness, I'm a striver, striving for greatness always. So keep that growth mindset in mind. You know what I love to do, speaking of impact, Gretchen, is make an impact in the lives of others. And I do that through leadership development, facilitation. I do executive coaching and in all levels in organizations coaching, but executive coaching is a nice header for that. Team building, so creating experience-based team events that really help people to understand, if I can do this with my team, maybe a fun activity, what are the other things that I can take back to the workplace? And then the last thing, which is a new part of the work that I do, new in the last 4 years, is along with a partner, I lead women's retreats called High Vibe Tribe Retreats, where we do yoga, mindfulness, meditation, and personal transformation.
I love it. And I know those work because I have many people in my life that have either been on a retreat with you or have been coached by you and just rave about how wonderful you are. So I'm so grateful that you're here to share with our audience today. Let's start talking about you just a little bit because I want to get into all your good work, but I want to know a little bit more about you. So where do you think that you have had an impact as a leader?
So my impact as a leader is helping other leaders to create impact. And so just like when I was in corporate America, had teams that I worked with, I think one of the bigger things, Gretchen, is helping people to recognize and see. You talked about greatness, recognize and see their greatness. And also, what are things that we can do to get out of our own way, whether that be some blocking and tackling around skills and competencies, or working on, our inner game so that we maybe have a greater degree of self-awareness so that we can have more fruitful relationships, which allows us to help others maximize themselves and to help others. As a leader, your success is measured by the success of others.
Yeah. How did you decide to kind of make that transition from working in the corporate world to moving into this very kind of specific niche of learning and development and coaching? Like how did that transition occur for you?
So I love this question because so many people in our world, Gretchen, that do the work we do, they maybe worked in corporate training and development or talent development or organizational development. And it was like, oh, I'll transition into doing this under my own, shingle. Oh, no, not me. I'm a little slow on the uptake. So I spent 18 years in corporate America. I'm so grateful for that experience because it taught me so much about the inner workings and insight for now the folks that I work with. I went through a transformational leadership development course myself. And honestly, I wasn't the person sitting in the front row. I was toward the back, and it made such a big impact on me. I literally remember thinking, man, like if in my next life, I would totally do this. And somehow that organization picked me out of the crowd and said, we think you would be a good coach and facilitator. And I kind of looked at them and said, I had to look behind me. They can't be talking to me. Meanwhile, my heart is in my throat, because if I had the courage to speak that, I would have. But I was like, whoa, like this is pretty cool. And knowing the impact it made on me and actually getting picked out was really the catalyst for me getting into the work. And I actually, for 2 years, Gretchen, I was working in a totally different field. I was in international business development for a logistics company. So make that transition from that into, coaching and development. But here's how you found your passion. I was working a 50, 60 hour, maybe plus corporate gig, and still finding time nights and weekends to coach and facilitate for free. And after 2 years, I said, you know what, I'm going to do the if leap and the net will appear. And the commitment I made to myself was, in a year, if I'm sleeping on a friend's couch and eating ramen noodles, I'll go back to corporate. But if things are working, I'm going to hang in there. And, we're here together. So obviously, I might have still been eating ramen noodles, but I'm like, I'm in this.
Oh, Tess, I love that story. There's so many good things in that. I love, I love that you were singled out, like that they found you. Like, I think one of the most magical things as a leader is when you see someone and you see this brightness and this light in them, you see this potential, you see the capacity in them, and want to just inflame that, like make it even bigger, make it brighter, right? And I think one of the most frustrating things about being a manager of people is when you want it more than that person does, right? Or what you see in them, they can't see in themselves, and they're almost like resistant to hearing that. You talked about in the beginning of your story, you were like heart in your chest and heart was pounding. How different would that have been if you would have just been like, nah, I'm in logistics, like,
yeah. Yeah. It would have, it would have changed everything. And you're so right. I'm always excited when I ask a group of people, have you ever had someone who believed in you more than you believe in yourself? And hands go up, and I'm like, yay, you. Because that can be one of the biggest gifts we can get in our careers. And you're right. Then as a manager or leader, or even for me, I had to learn in my coaching that I couldn't want it more than the folks that I was coaching. Sometimes we get to push from behind. Sometimes we get to pull from the front. And often it's, I'm going to come beside you. And it's hard when it's like, hey, you're hanging back. Come on.
I got you. We're right
Get up here.
Come on. Come on.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. Well, so then with all this great work that you've done, what would you say is your life's purpose?
Making a difference in the lives of others, really helping them to see their full potential.
How do people experience you? Like, what do you think like attracts people to you for you to work with them?
Wow, it's a good question. I am very outcome oriented. And so one of the things that I really like to get clear about is, what is it that we want to accomplish here? Whether it's an individual or a team that I'm working with. It's a little bit of Covey. Let's begin with the end in mind. The more clear we are about that, then we're able to develop success measures to get there. And from those success measures, then let's look at the behaviors. Let's look at the tactics, the things that you can do to have that level of success. So it could be attitudinal, could be behaviors, could be actions that people take.
I love it.
So I think that, and I won't step over things. If I see it or hear it, I'm going to say it and be that mirror. I think in coaching, that's a big part of coaching is, can I just say back to you what I heard you say? And I literally have had people, Gretchen, who have said, oh, ow, I said that. I'm like, yes. And I've also had people who have said, whoa, that's really smart. I'm like, you said it. You are really smart.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Let me ask you, how do you define servant leadership? And how would you say that's different from other traditional leadership models?
If you're a servant leader, you know what I think the biggest difference is? Can I put a greater emphasis, look left, look right, put a greater emphasis there than I do on myself? So it is being very self-aware. It's not being ego-driven. We all have egos, of course, but not having our personal ego in the driver's seat and helping other people find success, really serving them, help, like we've talked about earlier, helping them to really live out their potential. And, you can be a great leader by coming alongside people and maybe not have their best interest in mind over yours. And I think we're talking about impact. The impactful leaders are truly the ones that know what people want, know what motivates them, what their drivers are. And many times those things are even bigger than what we're trying to accomplish in the workplace.
Oh, I completely agree with that. I want to go back because before you and I jumped on the mic here, we were talking about a mindful practice. And you talked about, I loved your definition about servant leadership is about self-awareness. And can you share with our listeners that daily mindful practice that you said that has been like transformational for you? I think that would be such a great tip and a great lesson for our folks. Like grab your pencils, friends, so that they can get done this good practice that you said that you've done.
Yeah. Happy to share that. So this was another aha moment for me, Gretchen. I've been a lifelong athlete, and several years ago, I was training for a marathon, and I knew the power of visualization. A lot of, like, one of my favorite parts of watching the Olympics is seeing how the athletes prepare before they jump in the pool, run the race, get on the balance beam, what have you. So prior to this marathon, I decided I was going to visualize every day, even if it was for 5 minutes. I was like, oh, I'll visualize mile 8 to 13. And then I'll visualize mile, 18 to 21. And then, so I was running the Chicago Marathon. I get to the marathon. I toe the line. I run the race. I run a PR. But the thing that was uncanny for me is I had never been on any of these streets in Chicago, but I felt like I'd been there before. And it was that event that I thought, why am I not applying these things to the rest of my life? And so I do a lot of personal development reading. Like, I'm an Audible and reading junkie in terms of personal professional development. Okay. So at the time, I think I was reading the book called The Answer. And in it, he talks about vision boards and things like that. So I ended up putting together a process that I call it TSRW. And I'll tell you why in a moment. So the process, when I get up in the morning, and I can do this in 5 minutes, or if I have more time, I'll take 15, whatever. But I will get into a positive state. So if you're familiar with Tony Robbins, Anthony Robbins, he's all about state. So it's like I just get into an like energy state. Like, how is it that I'm going to feel when I realize these things? And then I will spend some time with conscious breath work and or meditation. And again, 5 minutes. So sometimes maybe I'm just meditating for 3 or 4 minutes. After the meditation, I will visualize maybe a part of the outcome that I'm looking to achieve. Or this morning, I was doing a training before we recorded. I'm going to visualize how I want that training to go, as an example. Then I pick up my journal and I have affirmations. So I'll say them, and I actually write them out. I'm tactical. I like to do that. Sometimes I'll just say them. And then the last thing I do, because I'm a huge fan of gratitude, I'll write down at least 5 3 to 5 things that I'm grateful for. So that's my personal practice. And I call it TSRW because I've taught this to other folks, other coaching clients. And I had someone call me one day and they're like, Des, you're not going to believe it. This thing I've been visualizing happened. And they're like, but you would believe it because you've got that process. And I'm like, I know, but isn't it like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And they're like, this shit really works. And I'm like, yes, it does. So TSRW stands for this shit really works.
So much. Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, really, really good. Let's talk a little bit about when you're working with leaders is one thing, but then working with teams is something else. So how do you approach making an impact from individuals to a team?
I think one of the big differences, and I cannot tell you like how I came to be a facilitator over a speaker, probably because the transformational work that was modeled for me was a very facilitated process. I do speaking gigs and I love facilitation. So I look at facilitation as the expertise, the experience, the know-how is in the room, and what is the best way for me to pull that out, which we do that in coaching. So I really look at, there's content that I want to get across to the folks in the room who are, learning. And there's also, the contribution that they get a lot from. Like if I'm a colleague of yours and I find out, wow, you're really struggling with, giving performance feedback too, because I've created a space for them to be able to share that. There's a big connection that gets made there. And then there's some sustainability, because I might be more likely to say, wow, Gretchen really knows how to address this. I'm going to stay in touch with her. And I'm not alone too. I'm not alone. She's also having those issues too. So helping participants to understand they're not alone, and creating a safe environment for them to be able to speak up about the things that are happening that they want to address, to celebrate the things that are going really, really well. And then there's, as you know, there's behavioral science that goes into the process. I'm not a behavioral scientist, but I know, creating pairs discussions, having small group discussion, giving teams the opportunity, because of my team building, to interact and do some activities while they're learning, just are great ways to help those participants really learn and remember what they're doing and be able to take it outside of the training room and apply it into their work.
One of the things that I have found when I'm working with teams is this kind of like struggling with authenticity and vulnerability. Especially, I think, as teams have been together a long time, and if they maybe are not social outside of work, but they're very social at work. So we're work friends, we're not lifelong friends, right? What do you do to maybe encourage authenticity in influencing people's styles, or encouraging authenticity in an individual as well as in a group?
I think one of the most impactful ways is to model. And if I'm with a group, and I'll give you an example, I'm certified in 5 behaviors of a cohesive team, which is Lencioni's work. I love that body of work. Teams take an assessment before the training. And one of the things that I will do prior to the training is sit down with the leader of the group and ask them to partner with me around that authenticity, around vulnerability, so that we can create a very psychologically safe environment for people to really dive into trust and vulnerability-based trust. Because once someone starts to show up authentically and vulnerably, others kind of look around and it's like, oh, okay, it's safe to do so. They'll be more apt. That's like one example. I do think it does, like if you're coaching and or facilitating, like if I want it to be in the space, I better show up that way.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the biggest fears that managers, people who lead other people, face today? Like, what do you think are some of those big fears?
When I look at the work that I do with teams, that development, time is a big one. Biggest fear is, how am I going to find time to lead and develop because I've got all these other things to do. So I think time is one. Unless they are in a maybe a company or a culture that has some development, I think it can be a little difficult if I really don't know what to do. And I'm going to have to just kind of figure it out trial by fire. So in situations where I'm working with a leader that maybe the organization doesn't have a lot of development, it's like there are a lot of things that we can do to help develop ourselves. Podcasts like this. We've both talked about Audible and reading. There are industry associations, great ways to learn. So there's a lot of agency that we can take for ourselves to develop ourselves. And we don't have to use our environment as an excuse for that. Even though we could point the finger, we don't have to.
What kind of impact do you desire for teams that you're working with?
Starting with the outcomes is, and that it can change based upon the team, the culture, the organization. So it really depends on what is it that they want, that end goal. That's how I back into the impact piece, is knowing that. And inside of each organization, like I talked earlier about the success measures, how they define success can be very unique to every business. For example, I talked about 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. Well, there are some, I'll call them generic outcomes of that training, but I want to know with the team I'm with, what do you need to be a high performing team, given the industry you're in, the culture of the leadership team, what have you. And so that's where the impact comes is, okay, given what you want, let's look at success. And, the impact we'll measure is now that the team has set forth a framework to be high performing, really that's where the impact starts. Like, are we going to go out? Are we going to be committed to go out and do these things to align around these behaviors that will allow us to achieve the things we say we want to achieve?
What do you do with leaders who don't know? We want to be high performing. I don't know. So yes, what are those outcomes? I don't know. What do you think they should be? How do you kind of pull that out from a leader?
A lot like what you just modeled. Like, I might say, well, if you don't know, let's talk about a team that you've been on that had some of the aspects that you might be looking for. What did that look like? Or, hey, you might know some friends who talk about their business and ways that their teams work. What kinds of things do you talk about? What something interested you about doing this? Let's try to unpack that. And so just like with coaching, like let's dig in. I might even say, let's start with the challenges. What are some of the biggest challenges that your team is experiencing? And let's start there, because if we can get those things resolved and get those out of the way, then we can, work towards like the impact, we can work towards those ideal results.
Let's stay on challenges for a minute, because I can think of a couple people that I know have wrestled with this. I've been talking with a couple of folks, and what if the challenge for the person is something that feels so big, like the depth and the breadth of it feels so big, but the reality is it feels so big because they've never done it before. And so the story that they're telling themselves is, this is so hard and it's overly complicated and I'm not really sure what to do, because they've never done it before. What are strategies that you would implement with either someone that you're coaching, or even if it's a team, like if a team's like, we're being asked to do something that nobody's ever done before, and oh my gosh, this is so hard, we don't even know where to begin. What are some strategies that you would put into place with those kinds of individuals?
Kind of like the same thing I do in my life. And I'll give you an example. It's not the most beautiful one for one, but it's similar. It'll get us there. Just this past weekend. So I have a lot of deliverables that I need to get done. And I realized, I'm scrambling in my head around all these. And it's like, okay, let me take it from my brain onto a page, and then I can get myself organized. And so in the same way that I kind of unpacked that with these, Like, I've got this massive thing. I don't even know where to start. Start to unpack it. Let's chunk it down. So what is one? You don't have to go from A to Z, but what if we just did one thing towards where you're headed? And it doesn't have to be big, and try to temper it to create some action, which will then create some momentum. If you can start to create a picture of it, then you can start to back into what you can accomplish.
Yeah. I always find it helpful too when I'm talking with somebody, and even with myself, like, oh my gosh, I don't know where to start. I love that you said, like, first write it down. And then I kind of like to end something with that after I've think, okay, so this is what it looks like. This is what milestones might look like to get to that. And then what's one thing I could do this week without a ton of discretionary effort necessarily, a ton of effort, that I could move this forward. So that way I feel like I am starting to do this, even though I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done this before. What's one thing I can do this week that gets me to that, right?
Yeah.
That just kind of feels more, I can do this.
Yeah, right. Make it more accessible to you, because if you are in a stress state about it, it's going to feel that much more massive and overwhelming, which can, kind of have us hesitate from taking action.
I want you to talk a little bit about retreats too, because I know I have a lot of people that listen to the show that choose to take retreats either with their team, like a strategy type of retreat. They're going to take every quarter, or maybe like twice a year they go away. We're going to do some strategic planning, which I think that there's value in that. But I know that you mentioned right off the bat, like, you do retreats. Talk to our listeners about what you love about retreats and what you think makes a really successful retreat.
So I mentioned the High Vibe Tribe retreats. That really came out of being a part of leadership team retreats, especially like with the team building work I do, like Lencioni work that I do, that I would have organizations say, hey, can you come and do it at this offsite? The High Vibe Tribe retreats specifically, pre and post COVID, we've seen just a tremendous amount of stress. And post COVID, probably like you, Gretchen, I started hearing a lot of alarming descriptions of what was going on for people. I feel like I'm going to break.
Isolated, alone, all those things.
Yes, all of those things. And it really got my attention. I had been talking with Amy Woodall. So she's the co-founder of High Vibe Tribe Retreats, and she's in development. And
yes, love Amy, huge fan.
Yeah, who's not? And she said, I've always wanted to do a retreat. I said, me too. I said, let's do it. And so we built High Vibe Tribe out of, and we do these retreats for women, but we both talked about our mindfulness practices and those things that have really helped us with our professional and self-development, helped us with our self-care, and I'll also say self-preservation. And we decided, like, that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to make these retreats available for women, to give them the opportunity to hit pause, invest some time in themselves, so that they can, create some practices around their self-care and self-preservation, to de-stress, to create a community of other like-minded women, and to be able to bring to the retreat anything that they might want to work on personally or professionally. And after our first retreat, which we did in 2021, so our first retreat was going to be in 2020, so obvious reasons it didn't happen. But we took a group to Costa Rica in 2021. The testimonials from the participants we were just blown away. I mean, just how it made an impact for these women. And we're looking at each other like, we're talking about TSRW. We're like, this is amazing. And we're like, well, okay, it was magical here. Let's see how our second one goes. And our second retreat, we went to Tulum, and same thing. And we looked at each other and said, we're on to something. We can really make an impact for people here, for women here. And so Sedona last year, and in November, we're doing a retreat in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, central Mexico. Beautiful. It's a beautiful European city in the middle of Mexico. It really is. It's quaint. Many U.S. expats there. And we have a beautiful hotel where we'll be doing the work. Yeah.
When you have facilitated retreats for business leaders and their teams, what would you say are some of like your best practices to make sure that that is a worthwhile outcome? What are some things that if you were being asked to go help facilitate on a retreat, what are some things that are like maybe non-negotiables that you need to see in place before you're like, yep, I think this will be a success?
I'm always listening for right fit, first of all, whether I'm talking to a potential person I may coach or a company to work with. Am I the right fit, and vice versa? So that's, kind of like non-negotiable. And then, in coaching, we look for coachability, and I look for the same in teams as well. And it can be, and any leader on this call knows, it can be hard to judge the willingness, the coachability of a person, let alone a group. And so I want to know that they're really committed and there to do the work. I may only have 1 or 2 points of contact in the beginning, but often I will do one-on-ones with the teams before we arrive. And then I've got even more insight about individuals, and that helps me with the team dynamic. And if I hear anything that's really off, then I would bring that up with the leader. But it's just making sure that people are ready to do the work, willing to do the work. In the 4 stages of psych safety, Dr. Clark talks about, are you ready to crack yourself open a bit? And for all of us, that can mean something different. We all come to trust and vulnerability different ways, and that's okay. And are you willing to get yourself outside of your comfort zone just to get a bit and get into that stretch zone?
Yeah. Oh, so good. Des, if someone wants to contact you for coaching, or if they want to go on this high vibe retreat with you or bring you in to kind of help facilitate some team dynamics, what's the best way for folks to get connected with you?
Yeah, well, I love all that. And even if it's simply a conversation to see if it makes sense, I welcome that. My website, either for my company or High Vibe Tribe, and I'll give you those in a moment, unless you want to put it in the show notes.
I'll put them in the show notes, but you feel free to say
and
it
then
too.
And LinkedIn, of course.
Yeah. Des, thank you so much for being here. You've been such a gift. So many good practices to share with us. I'm so grateful for you.
I am just wildly grateful to have been with you this afternoon. So thank you.
Oh my goodness. Don't you just love her? I could listen to her talk all day. Her calm voice, it's just amazing. One thing I wanted to mention that we talked about off camera and off the mic that I want to make sure you guys know about. She has a great free download on her website called 5 Ways to Build a Winning Team. So if you enjoyed her conversation and are more interested in understanding like the work that she does with teams, I encourage you to go to her website and check it out. But I also want to know, are you loving this content? If you are, give me a couple stars. I'd love to hear right now. Take a moment right now. Be intentional. Give us some stars. Let us know what you think of the show. If you have guests that you'd love for me to interview, make sure you reach out to me through LinkedIn. Send me a message. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can give us a rating and a review. But most importantly, in these next couple months, we're about midway through the year, I want you to remember, you are made for impact.